Ava stood tall in the barn, her hands covered in dirt and her face flushed with the warmth of the midday sun. She wasn't just any young girl. She was the heartbeat of the ranch, the one who kept everything running. Every morning, before the sun even peeked over the horizon, she was already up, tending to the animals. Her little brother, Eli, still asleep in their small cabin, would often be the last thing on her mind, but she'd always make sure to wake him up with a smile and a warm breakfast once the chores were done. Ava was only 13, but life on the ranch had made her wise beyond her years. She wasn't just a caretaker for the animals, but for Eli too. The bond between them was undeniable. Eli, though younger by 4 years, had grown up relying on Ava in ways no one else could understand. The way she protected him, fiercely and without question, was something to behold. She took care of him like a mother, a role she never signed up for, but had found herself slipping into ever since their parents started working from dawn till dusk. Their parents, having been born into the hardships of ranch life, were always away tending to the larger farm, hiring out to other landowners to make ends meet. They couldn't afford to spend their days inside the cabin. It was Ava who kept things in order. She fed the livestock, mended fences, and made sure the barn was clean. She kept the fire stoked and meals hot for when her parents returned late at night. No one had ever asked her to do these things. She just knew it had to be done. The ranch was a vast, sprawling piece of land covered with dry, cracked earth and untamed grasses that stretched out endlessly. The land was beautiful in its own way, yet it held an unyielding grip on those who lived there. Ava was no stranger to the hard labor it demanded. There was a constant hum of work around the ranch, feeding the cows, gathering eggs, fixing what was broken, and hauling firewood, tasks that had to be done with little rest. Ava's day didn't start or end with the animals. There was cooking, cleaning, and keeping the cabin warm. The wind often howled through the gaps in the walls, a reminder of how isolated they were. Ava would gather all the food she could, sometimes hunting small game or picking herbs in the nearby fields, and cook for the two of them. The smell of stew or bread would fill the cabin when Eli woke up, his small face lighting up at the sight of something hot to eat. The days blended together in a long, tiring rhythm. There was no time for anything but survival. When Eli was too small to help with chores, Ava was the one who stepped in, and when he was old enough, she taught him what he could. As hard as it was, Ava found a strange comfort in the routine. There was no time to think, no space for emotions, only actions. She learned early on that to survive in the harsh world they lived in, you needed to keep moving forward. And moving forward was exactly what she did with Eli by her side. Despite the grueling workload, Ava rarely complained. She couldn't afford to. She was all Eli had, and that made her stronger than she could have ever imagined. The ranch was both their prison and their home, a place where time moved slowly and the land stretched endlessly around them. Every morning brought with it a new set of challenges: repairing the fences that the storms knocked down, fixing the well, or patching up the cabin's roof after the harsh winds tore at it. Yet, Ava had made peace with this life. She wasn't free, but she wasn't hopeless either. As long as she had Eli, she could endure. Her hands were calloused from the work, her arms tired, but the love she felt for her little brother gave her strength. Together, they had carved a life in the midst of a land that had little mercy to offer. And it was this bond, this fierce love, that Ava would fight for above everything else. One afternoon, just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, a new presence made its way toward Ava's ranch. The wind carried the scent of dust and horses, but this time, something felt different, something heavier. Ava was busy feeding the chickens when she heard the sound of hooves pounding against the earth. She looked up, her eyes narrowing at the sight of a figure in the distance, riding a large, imposing horse. As he drew closer, Ava could see him clearly, tall, broad-shouldered, with a weathered face that seemed to be carved from stone. The man sat high on his horse, his presence filling the empty space around him like an ominous shadow. The man was known in the area, though Ava had only heard stories. His name was Jasper Blackwell, a rancher with a notorious reputation. He was as rich as he was feared, and everyone in the region knew that when Jasper Blackwell came to town, something would change. People whispered about him behind closed doors, how he bought out smaller ranches, how he was ruthless in business, how no one ever dared to say no to him. His wealth had made him untouchable, and his power even more so. Ava had heard the stories, but until now, they had been just that, stories. As he rode up to the gate, Ava stood still, her heart suddenly pounding in her chest. She didn't know why, but there was something unsettling about him, something in his eyes that felt as cold as the winter winds. His horse's hooves struck the ground like a warning, echoing in the empty space. He reined in his horse and dismounted with ease, his boots hitting the earth with a soft thud. Well, he said in a deep, gravelly voice, his eyes scanning the ranch with an almost predatory interest. This is quite the place you've got here. Not much to look at, but I see some potential. Ava's hands clenched around the bucket she was holding. She hadn't invited him here, but there he was, standing tall and unmoving, as if expecting to be welcomed. She swallowed hard, her instincts telling her to turn away, to retreat inside and shut the door behind her. But she knew she had no choice. She couldn't show fear, not now. "Can I help you?" Ava's voice was steady, though her heart raced in her chest. She was trying to sound confident, try to maintain control of the situation. She didn't want him to see how much his presence unsettled her. Jasper smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "I'm looking to make a deal," he said, his voice smooth like honey but with a sharp edge. "A business deal. I've heard a lot about your family, about this place." He looked at the barn, the chicken coop, and the fence lines, as if measuring their worth. "I'd like to offer you some money. A fair amount. For your brother." Ava blinked, sure that she had misheard him. "What?" "You heard me." Jasper didn't flinch, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm offering to buy your brother, Eli. I could use him on my ranch as a farmhand. He's strong, I'm sure. He could help with the animals, the land. A good, steady worker, just like his sister." Ava's heart skipped a beat. The idea of selling Eli, the thought was sickening. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The rancher continued, unfazed by her silence. "I'll pay you well for him," he added, almost too casually. "Gold, land. I'm not unreasonable. I think it's a fair deal for everyone involved. Eli would get a roof over his head, food, and work. It's an offer many people would jump at." He paused, as if weighing his words. "Of course, you'd need to agree, but I'm sure that won't be a problem." The words felt like a punch in the gut. Ava felt her legs go weak. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. This man, this stranger, was offering to buy her brother. Eli wasn't surprised to be traded. He wasn't a piece of property. He was her little brother, the one person she would protect at all costs. "I can't," Ava finally managed to say, her voice thick with disbelief. "I can't sell him. He's not for sale." Jasper didn't seem surprised by her response. "I understand," he said, his tone still polite, but with an edge of impatience creeping in. "But I'm not going to just leave. This offer is good for now, but not for long. Think about it. Your family could use the money. I'm sure you've noticed how tough things have gotten around here." Ava's mind was racing. She wanted to shout, to tell him to leave, but she knew the reality of their situation. They were struggling. Every day was a fight to keep the ranch running, to make ends meet. The farm was small, and the land wasn't as fertile as it used to be. Her parents were away so often, and she was left to hold everything together. It wasn't just about survival. It was about keeping Eli safe. If she gave in, if she accepted this man's offer, she would lose him. No, Ava's voice was firm now, though her heart was still pounding in her chest. "You can't have him." Jasper seemed to consider this for a moment. "Ava, I'm offering you a chance to improve your life. Your brother could work for me. He'd be well cared for. Don't make this harder than it has to be. But Ava's mind was made up. She couldn't let Eli go. Not to this man, not to anyone. Leave, she said, her voice more forceful now. I'm not selling him. Jasper didn't leave right away. He stood there for a moment, looking at her as if weighing whether or not to push further. Finally, he gave a slow nod. All right, for now. But remember, the offer stands. Think about it. I'll be back. With that, he turned and walked back to his horse. Ava watched him go, her heart still pounding in her chest. As the sound of hooves faded into the distance, she stood frozen, the weight of what had just happened sinking in. Inside the cabin, she found her parents, still unaware of what had just occurred. She didn't tell them yet, didn't know how to. The rancher's words echoed in her mind. He'd be back, and the offer would still stand. Ava knew she had to do something. She had to find a way to protect Eli, no matter what. Because the next time Jasper came, he wouldn't be leaving without a fight. Ava sat alone in the quiet cabin, the shadows stretching long across the wooden floors. The evening light filtered through the small window, casting a soft glow on the room. But Ava's mind was far from peaceful. She had just faced the most difficult moment of her life. The giant rancher, Jasper Blackwell, had come to her ranch and offered money in exchange for Eli. The thought of losing him, of letting someone else take him away, gnawed at her insides. Her little brother, Eli, sat on the floor, playing with a small wooden toy he had carved himself. His innocent laughter filled the cabin, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside Ava's heart. She watched him for a moment, her eyes softening, but then a heavy sigh escaped her lips. She couldn't let this happen. She wouldn't let this happen. Eli looked up from his play, his wide eyes filled with curiosity. "What's wrong, Ava?" he asked, his voice small and full of concern. Ava forced a smile and moved over to him, kneeling beside his tiny frame. She reached out and gently brushed a lock of hair from his forehead. "Nothing's wrong, Eli," she said softly, though her voice trembled slightly. "I just need you to listen to me, okay?" Eli nodded, his face serious in a way that only children could manage. Ava took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. This was it. She had to say the words, had to make sure Eli understood, even if it was something he couldn't fully grasp just yet. "I know you're scared, Eli," Ava began, her voice tight with emotion. "But you don't have to worry. I'll never let anyone take you away from me. Not the rancher, not anyone. I promise you." Eli blinked up at her, his innocent blue eyes wide with trust. But I don't want to leave," he said softly. "I want to stay here with you." Ava felt a sharp ache in her chest, but she forced herself to stay strong. "You will stay here. I swear on everything I have. I won't let anyone take you away." Her words were firm, unshakable, as though she were trying to convince herself as much as she was trying to reassure him. Eli, still unaware of the full weight of the situation, smiled and nodded, his tiny hands clutching his toy. "Okay, Ava, I'll be brave. I trust you." Ava hugged him close, holding him tightly. She could feel his little heart beating against her own, steady and full of life. "You don't have to be brave yet," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "Just know that I'll always be here for you. Always." She pulled back and looked into his eyes, her resolve hardening. She had made a promise to herself that no matter what, she would keep Eli safe. She would work her entire life, if she had to. She would do anything to make sure that Eli would never be taken from her. Not by the rancher, not by anyone. The weight of the promise settled on her shoulders, but it was a burden she would carry willingly. She couldn't afford to lose him. As the days passed, Ava's determination only grew stronger. She worked harder than ever, taking on extra tasks to make sure the ranch remained intact. Every morning, she was up before the sun, feeding the animals, cleaning the barn, and mending fences. There was no time to rest, no time to let her guard down. Every moment felt like a race against time, a battle to keep the ranch running and keep Eli safe. The rancher, Jasper Blackwell, hadn't given up. He continued to offer money, land, and even promises of a better life for Eli. Each time he came, he made a bigger offer, trying to lure Ava and her family into submission. He was persistent, and that made Ava even more determined. She wouldn't let him win. She wouldn't let him take Eli. One evening, as Ava was finishing up her chores, she noticed her parents talking in hushed tones by the fire. They didn't notice her watching, but Ava could hear snippets of their conversation. Her father's voice was low and uncertain. "This ranch is barely keeping us alive, Annabelle. We can't keep going on like this. If we take his offer, we could have everything we need: food, land, a stable life. For Eli, too." Her mother's voice was more cautious, but still conflicted. "But he's offering Eli, James. He wants to buy him. We can't." I know. But what choice do we have?" James's voice cracked with frustration. "We're dying out here, Annabelle. The farm isn't enough anymore. We can't survive like this." Ava's stomach churned as she listened to her parents' words. They were considering it. The rancher's offer was tempting, more than tempting. It was a way out of their struggles. Ava knew the pressure they were under. She knew how hard they worked, how much they sacrificed, but she couldn't let them give in. Not now. Not when she had made a promise to Eli. She couldn't let them see her fear. She couldn't let them know how much the thought of losing Eli terrified her. Instead, Ava threw herself into her work even harder. She worked from dawn until dusk, feeding the animals, repairing the barn, tending to the land, and cooking meals for the family. She did everything she could think of, hoping that somehow her work would be enough to keep the ranch intact. But the more Ava worked, the more she felt the weight of their situation. Every day, the rancher's presence loomed closer, his offers growing bigger and more tempting. Ava could feel the tension in the air, thickening like a storm cloud about to burst. The rancher's persistence was like a pressure building inside her chest. She couldn't escape it. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the wind howled through the cracks in the cabin, Ava stood in the doorway, staring out at the vast stretch of land before her. The ranch, her home, seemed so small in the face of everything they were up against. Eli came up behind her, tugging at her sleeve. "Ava, are we going to be okay?" he asked, his voice small, filled with innocent concern. Ava knelt down in front of him, her heart aching. She brushed the hair from his forehead and smiled as best as she could. "We're going to be just fine, Eli," she said softly. "I promise you." But even as she spoke the words, Ava wasn't sure she believed them. The rancher wasn't going to give up. She could feel in her bones. And the longer she resisted, the more desperate the situation became. The stakes were higher now. She couldn't just protect Eli. She had to protect everything they had: the ranch, their way of life, and their future. It was a fight that was bigger than anything she had ever faced, and the fear of losing Eli made the weight of the battle even heavier. But Ava wouldn't stop. No matter how hard it got, no matter what came next, she would keep fighting. For Eli, for herself, for their future. She would never let the rancher take him. Not now, not ever. The days after the rancher's offer weighed heavily on Ava's mind. Every morning, she woke up before dawn, her muscles aching from the hard work, and every night, the cold crept deeper into her bones as she tried to sleep. But the storm that had been brewing on the ranch was not only in the sky, it was in her home. The rancher, Jasper Blackwell, had made his intentions clear. He wanted Eli, and his persistence was beginning to wear down even Ava's strongest defenses. Jasper had started visiting more frequently. At first, he was polite, offering Ava's family money and resources in exchange for Eli's labor. But now, his visits were less formal. He started dropping subtle hints, talking more about the future, about what Eli's life could be like if he joined Jasper's ranch. He would be fed well, he would have clothes, and he could live a life that was free from the hardship they faced on their small ranch. One afternoon, Jasper arrived with a horse-drawn cart full of goods. He pulled up to the cabin with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. "I thought you might need a little help," he said, gesturing to the cart. "Some grain for your livestock, tool for the barn, a few luxuries to make life a little easier." Ava stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, eyes narrowed. She wasn't fooled by his generosity. "We didn't ask for your help," she said, her voice firm. Jasper's smile faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered. Of course. But this is just a gesture, a small gift to show that I care about your family. I've been thinking a lot about your situation. You've worked so hard, but life here must be a constant struggle. I can make that all go away. If you just agree to let Eli come work with me, I'll give you everything you need: food, land, security, a future." Ava felt a cold chill settle over her, but she kept her expression steady. "We don't need you, Charity." Jasper didn't flinch. He had heard that kind of response before, but he knew how to deal with people like Ava. He wasn't going to give up that easily. "Think about it, Ava. This is about your family's future, about Eli's future. I can offer him a life where he doesn't have to work himself to the bone every day. He could have the kind of life he deserves." Ava's heart raced. He was playing on her love for Eli, using the very thing she held most dear to convince her. She clenched her fists. She couldn't let him manipulate her. "Eli's not for sale." Jasper's smile returned, though it was colder now. "I understand your hesitation, but think about it carefully. I can offer you a life where you won't have to struggle every day, where Eli won't have to live like this. It's a good deal. You won't find many offers like this." He left the cart of supplies at the door, his words hanging in the air like a cloud of smoke. Ava watched him leave, the weight of his offer pressing down on her chest. She knew that he wasn't just offering help. He was trying to buy their future by Eli, and it terrified her. The next few days were quiet, but Ava could feel the tension rising. Her parents seemed distracted, their faces etched with worry. Her father, James, had been out more often, working for other landowners, and when he came back, he didn't speak much. Her mother, Annabelle, had started eyeing the supplies Jasper had left behind: the grain, the tools, and the small comforts. She would run her fingers over the fabric of the new blankets, and Ava saw how her mother's eyes lingered on the grain, imagining a life where they didn't have to struggle so much. One evening, as Ava worked late in the barn, her father came in, looking weary and distant. He leaned against the wooden doorframe, staring out at the darkening horizon. Ava paused in her work, sensing something was wrong. She had grown used to his silence, but tonight it felt different. "Ava," he said quietly, his voice heavy, "I've been thinking a lot about what the rancher said, about what he's offering." Ava froze, her heart skipping a beat. She didn't want to hear this. She didn't want to even think about it. "Don't," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Her father turned to her, his face worn and tired. "We're barely getting by. This ranch, it's not enough. The land's not giving us what we need anymore. If we took his offer, we could have a better life. We wouldn't have to worry about where the next meal's coming from. We could have security." "No," Ava said, shaking her head. "We can't. Eli's not something to be sold." Her voice cracked, but she fought to hold her ground. Her father sighed, his hand running through his hair. "I'm not saying we should sell him, but you've seen the struggle, Ava. You've seen how hard it's been. If we don't accept, we might lose everything anyway. You know what it's like out here. It's getting harder." Ava's breath caught in her throat. She knew the pain of seeing their family struggle. She saw it in her father's tired eyes, in the lines etched deep into her mother's face. But she wouldn't let Eli be the price for their survival. He was a child, not a commodity. "I won't let you sell him," she said, her voice fierce. "I won't." Her father looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. He didn't speak again that night, but the tension between them had shifted. Ava could feel it in the way he avoided her gaze the next morning, in the way her mother had started looking at the supplies with longing. The pressure of it all was becoming unbearable. Every time Jasper visited, he brought something new: more luxuries, more promises, more ways to make life easier. He spoke of land, of comfort, of a future free from struggle. But every word he said felt like a trap. And yet, her parents were tempted, torn between the promise of a better life and the bond of family. Ava couldn't stand it. She couldn't stand the way they were wavering. She couldn't stand how the rancher's manipulation was working. So, she did what she had to do. She confronted them. One evening, after dinner, when the cabin was quiet, Ava stood in front of her parents. Her hands were clenched at her sides, her heart pounding in her chest. "We're not selling Eli," she said, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and desperation. "We can't. I promised him. I promised." Her parents exchanged glances, their expressions torn. Her mother, Annabelle, was the first to speak. "Ava, we know you love him, but we can't keep living like this. It's getting harder every day. Maybe we have to think about what's best for him, even if it means a life with a rancher." Ava's world tilted. She shook her head, feeling the weight of their words pressing down on her. "You're willing to sell him? To give him away just because things are hard? What happened to family? What happened to the promise we made to each other?" Her father spoke softly, his voice worn with the weight of the decision. "We're not giving him away, Ava. We're trying to do what's best for all of us." "No," Ava shouted, her voice echoing in the small cabin. "You're making a deal with the devil. He doesn't care about us. He doesn't care about Eli. He just wants to use him." Her parents fell silent. Ava could see the conflict in their eyes, the way they were torn between their survival and their love for her and Eli. But in that moment, Ava realized something. She was the one who had to protect Eli. She was the one who had to stand firm. And she would. "Promise me," Ava said, her voice low but steady. "Promise me you won't sell him." Her parents didn't answer right away. It was a long silence before her father spoke, his voice heavy. "I promise you, Ava, we won't." Ava's heart felt lighter, but the weight of the situation remained. The rancher's manipulation was far from over. But for now, she had won this battle. And she would keep fighting because she knew that as long as she stood strong, Eli would never be taken from her. The pressure had been building for weeks now, heavier than ever, and Ava could feel the walls closing in. Every day, the rancher's visits became more frequent, his offers more tempting. He came with promises of security, comfort, and wealth. But all Ava could see was a future where Eli wasn't free, where he was nothing more than a tool to work for someone else's gain. The thought of losing him gnawed at her constantly, eating away at the hope she had left. She could feel the weight of her parents' indecision every time they exchanged glances when a rancher's name was mentioned. They were torn, caught between their need for survival and their love for Eli. Ava knew she couldn't wait for them to make a decision. They were too exhausted, too vulnerable. She had to act. She couldn't risk losing Eli, not after everything they had been through. The thought of negotiating with Jasper Blackwell filled her with dread, but she knew she had no other choice. She had to confront him, face him alone, and make him understand that Eli was not for sale, no matter how much money he offered. Ava had always been strong, but this was the hardest thing she had ever done. If she failed, she would lose Eli. There would be no second chances. After hours of pacing the cabin, thinking of every possible way to handle the situation, Ava made her decision. She would go to the rancher. She would go to him and speak to him directly, hoping to find a way out of this nightmare without compromising their dignity or their lives. She didn't know if it would work, but it was the only option she had left. The next morning, before the sun had even risen, Ava slipped away from the cabin. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. She knew they would try to stop her, but she couldn't let fear hold her back. She had to be the one to face the rancher. She walked with purpose, her boots crunching against the frost-covered ground as she made her way toward his ranch. By the time she arrived, the sun was beginning to rise, casting a soft light over the sprawling land. Jasper Blackwell's ranch loomed in the distance, a symbol of wealth and power, and it felt like the world's weight was pressing down on her shoulders as she approached. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she pushed through, determined to do what needed to be done. Jasper was in the stable when Ava arrived. He looked up as she entered, his eyes cool and calculating. He didn't seem surprised to see her. It was almost as if he had been waiting for this moment. He wiped his hands on a cloth and turned to face her, a sly smile forming on his lips. "I knew you'd come," he said, his voice smooth and low, like melted honey. "You're a determined girl, Ava. I admire that." Ava's resolve was hardening with every step she took. "I didn't come here to admire you," she said, her voice steady despite the tension running through her. "I came here to make it clear that Eli is not for sale." Jasper's smile faltered for a split second, but then it was back, wider than before. "You misunderstand, Ava," he said. "I'm not asking you to give him up. I'm offering you a future without hardship, a future where you and your family can live comfortably." Ava's fist clenched. "You're not offering me a future. You're offering me a life of slavery for Eli. I won't let you take him." Jasper took a step toward her, his presence towering over her. "You're a smart girl, Ava. You know as well as I do that this life you're holding onto will break you. Eli doesn't deserve to live like this. He deserves more. I can give him that. I can give both of you that." Ava's mind raced. He was trying to manipulate her with words she knew all too well. He was trying to sell her a dream that wasn't real. He wasn't offering a better life. He was offering control. "I'm not giving in," Ava said, her voice hard as stone. "I'll fight you until the end, Jasper. You can't have him." Jasper's smile remained, but there was a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "You're stubborn. I admire that too. But stubbornness doesn't win battles, Ava. It just makes them more difficult. I've already made you an offer. If you don't accept, you'll have nothing left." The tension in the room thickened, and Ava felt a cold shiver crawl up her spine. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing in on her, but she wasn't backing down. She would never back down. "I'm not leaving here without Eli," she said, standing her ground. Jasper studied her for a long moment, his eyes narrowing. "Very well," he said. "If you want to play hardball, I can play that game too. But you should know something first, Ava." Ava's heart skipped a beat, a sudden unease crawling up her skin. "What are you talking about?" Jasper leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "There's something you don't know about me. Something I haven't told you. I'm not just some rancher looking for labor. I've got connections. Big ones. And those connections are what keep me in control." Ava's mind raced. She had heard rumors about Jasper's dealings with powerful men, people who could make or break someone's life with a word. But she had never thought it would come to this. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to stay calm. Jasper smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I've been using you, Ava. I've been playing this game for a long time, and you've been too blind to see it." Ava's stomach churned as the realization hit her. The rancher wasn't just trying to buy Eli for his labor. He was trying to buy their future, their survival. He had been manipulating them, using their desperation against them. Her hands shook as the weight of the truth settled in her mind. She had to act fast. The rancher had just given her the key to defeating him. She knew his weakness. Ava stood taller, her voice now filled with quiet fury. "You may have connections, Jasper, but you don't have what it takes to break me. I'm not some pawn you can control. You're not getting Eli, and you're not getting me." Jasper's face darkened. For a moment, Ava thought he might strike her, but instead he stepped back, a cold, calculating look in his eyes. "We'll see about that," he said, his voice low. "We'll see who has the power in the end." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Ava standing in the stable, her heart racing. She had faced the rancher head-on and survived, but she knew the battle was far from over. She had learned something important today. The rancher had a dark side, and now she had the power to use that against him. The fight for Eli's freedom wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Ava stood in front of her small cabin, the wind biting at her skin as it howled through the trees. The tension in the air was palpable, like the calm before a storm. She had faced the rancher, Jasper Blackwell, and heard his words, but something in them didn't sit right. She could feel the weight of his lies, the manipulation beneath his promises of a better life. It wasn't just about Eli anymore. It was about their family, their land, their future. Ava couldn't allow the rancher to take that from them. She couldn't allow him to continue exploiting families like hers. Over the next few days, Ava spent every waking moment gathering information. She spoke to the ranch workers who had been under Jasper's thumb for years, quietly listening to their stories. They had all felt the pressure, the sense of helplessness as Jasper manipulated their lives. Each one had their own tale of how the rancher had used promises of prosperity to trap them, only to leave them in worse conditions than before. Ava listened carefully, her heart burning with anger. Jasper's actions weren't just about taking Eli. He was a predator, feeding off the hard work of those who had no choice but to accept his deals. Ava's anger turned to action. She couldn't just let this continue, not when she had the power to stop it. She went to the workers one by one, asking them to stand with her. At first, they were hesitant. They were scared, just as Ava had been, but she knew how to make them see the truth. One by one, they joined her cause, united by the shared understanding that they deserved better. They had been oppressed for too long, and Ava was determined to make sure their voices were heard. The plan was simple, but it was dangerous. They would confront Jasper, expose him for the manipulator he was, and refuse to let him take Eli. Ava knew it wouldn't be easy. Jasper had power. He had money, connections, and influence. But she had something he didn't, the will to fight for what was right. She gathered the workers in secret, and together they prepared for the final stand. The day of the confrontation arrived, and Ava felt a mixture of fear and resolve. She had never been one to back down from a fight, but this was different. This wasn't just about her and Eli anymore. This was about standing up to a man who had used and abused his power for far too long. As they approached Jasper's ranch, the workers gathered behind Ava, their faces determined. They weren't just fighting for Eli now. They were fighting for themselves, for their families, and for a future free of exploitation. Ava felt a surge of strength, a newfound courage she hadn't known she had. She had spent so much of her life protecting Eli, but now she was protecting everyone. When they arrived at the ranch, Jasper was waiting as expected. He stood tall, his usual smug smile on his face, but Ava could see the flicker of unease in his eyes. He knew this wasn't going to go the way he had planned. Ava stepped forward, her voice strong and unwavering. "You've been using people like us for far too long, Jasper. You've made promises, but they were all lies. You've exploited the hard work of families who had no choice but to trust you, and now you're going to pay for it." Jasper scoffed, his eyes narrowing. "You think you can stop me, Ava? I got power. I've got money. You can't win against me." Ava didn't flinch. It's not about power or money. It's about doing what's right. You don't own us. You don't own Eli, and we're not going to let you take him. The workers behind Ava began to speak up, their voices rising in unison. They had come together, and their collective strength was enough to shake the foundation of Jasper's control. The rancher's smirk faltered, and for the first time, Ava saw him hesitate. "You can't do this," Jasper hissed, his voice laced with desperation. "You think they'll stand with you? They're nothing without me." But the workers, now emboldened by Ava's courage, stood tall, their eyes filled with defiance. One by one, they stepped forward, refusing to back down. Ava had shown them the truth, and they would not let it go unchallenged. The confrontation grew heated, the air thick with tension. Jasper tried to assert his dominance, offering more money, more promises, but Ava wouldn't be swayed. She had seen through his lies, and she wasn't about to let him win. The workers, too, refused to be intimidated. Together, They stood as a united front, each one more determined than the last. The standoff continued, with Ava and her allies refusing to back down. Finally, after what felt like hours, the rancher's facade began to crumble. He could see that he was losing control, that the power he had once wielded so easily was slipping through his fingers. With a final, defeated look, he turned and stormed off, his words bitter. "You'll regret this," he spat, but no one followed him. Ava stood in the silence that followed, her heart pounding in her chest. They had done it. They had won. Jasper Blackwell, the man who had tried to tear their lives apart, was defeated, his manipulations exposed for what they were. Ava's promise to Eli was fulfilled. He was safe. Their family was safe. The workers gathered around Ava, their faces full of relief and gratitude. They had fought together, and they had won together. They were no longer under the thumb of a man who had used them for his own gain. Ava had given them back their dignity, their strength, and their hope. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with hues of gold and pink, Ava looked down at Eli, who stood beside her, his hand in hers. He looked up at her, his eyes full of trust, and Ava smiled. She had done it. She had protected him, and together, they had overcome the darkness that had threatened to consume them. The rancher was gone, his deceitful ways exposed, and Ava's family could finally breathe again. They no longer lived in fear of losing everything. They had their future back. Ava's strength and heroism had not only protected Eli, but it had given the entire community the courage to stand up for what was right. And in that moment, Ava knew that no matter what the future held, she would always fight for her family, her home, and the people she loved. The battle was over, but the journey was just beginning. With the rancher gone, the land was theirs once more. Ava had proven that even in the darkest of times, the power of love and determination could overcome the greatest of challenges. And as she stood there, looking out at the horizon, she knew that no matter what came next, they would face it together as a family. Months had passed since the day Ava stood against the rancher, and now, the land that once felt heavy with fear and uncertainty was filled with promise. Ava and Eli, along with their parents, had begun rebuilding their ranch with their own hands. It wasn't easy, but every day was a fresh start, a chance to turn their struggles into something stronger. They worked side by side, mending fences, planting crops, and rebuilding what had been broken. The earth, once a harsh reminder of their battle, now seemed to welcome their efforts, offering them the fruits of their labor in return for their sweat and determination. The community, inspired by Ava's bravery, had rallied around them. Neighbors who had once watched from a distance now stepped forward, offering their help. The workers who had once been oppressed by the rancher's manipulation came to help rebuild. The townsfolk brought tools, supplies, and labor. The once quiet ranch became a hub of activity, alive with the sounds of people working together. Ava felt a deep sense of gratitude as she watched her parents, her little brother, and the others work side by side, all of them united in a shared goal. They were no longer isolated or alone. They were part of something greater, a community that stood together, supporting each other. Ava looked back at the journey that had led them here. It had been a long road, full of challenges she never imagined facing. But as she stood at the heart of the ranch, surrounded by the fruits of their hard work, she realized just how far she had come. She had fought not just for Eli, but for her family, for the community, and for a future free from the shadow of the rancher. Ava had learned that her strength came from love, love for her brother, for her family, and for the land that had given them everything. She had found her voice, her courage, and a deeper sense of purpose than she had ever known. Eli, now a little older, and with the world beginning to make sense to him in ways it hadn't before, had grown into a thoughtful young boy. He watched Ava with admiration, always by her side as they worked together to make their future brighter. He now understood the weight of the sacrifices Ava had made for him, the sleepless nights, the battles fought with everything she had. As he worked alongside her, he would often pause, looking up at her with a look of quiet gratitude. He could never fully understand what it had taken for her to keep him safe, but he promised, in his own way, that he would always protect her, just as she had protected him. One evening, after a long day's work, Ava and Eli stood together at the edge of their property, looking out at the horizon. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow across the land. It was peaceful now, no longer a battleground, but a place where hope had taken root. The wind was calm, and the once dead trees had started to bloom again, a symbol of their resilience. Ava felt Eli's hand slip into hers, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. She looked down at him, her heart swelling with pride. The fear of the rancher was gone. The power he once held over them was no more. For the first time in a long time, Ava felt truly free. The ranch was no longer a place of fear and manipulation, but a home filled with love, hard work, and the promise of a better future. Ava smiled as she looked at Eli, and for a brief moment, the weight of everything they had been through seemed to melt away. "We did it," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Eli smiled back, his eyes shining with an understanding that only someone who had lived through hardship could have. "We did," he agreed softly. They stood together, watching as the last light of day faded into the evening, the stars beginning to appear one by one in the vast sky above them. Ava realized then that this was the future she had fought for, a future where love and family came first, where the land they worked together would provide for them, and where no one could take that away. The scene before her was peaceful, a stark contrast to the storms they had weathered. It was a new beginning, a life that they had built from nothing but their own strength and the unbreakable bond between them. As Ava looked out over the land, she knew there would still be challenges ahead. But for the first time, she felt ready for whatever came next. Because she knew, as long as they stood together, there was nothing they couldn't overcome. The story of their struggle, of their fight against the rancher, had ended. But the story of their new life had only just begun. The love Ava and Eli shared had carried them through the darkest of times, and it would continue to guide them into the future. They had learned that no matter what life threw at them, they were stronger together. They had each other, and that was all they needed. The final image of Ava and Eli standing together, their hands clasped as they faced the horizon, symbolized the strength of family, the power of love, and the resilience of the human spirit. There was no fear left in their hearts, only hope. And with that hope, they would continue to build the future they deserved. This was a story not just of survival, but of triumph. A story that reminded them all that even in the hardest times, love could always light the way. And so, they stood together, looking forward, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it as a family, as they always had.